Welcome to the Miami Eldercare channel, brought to you by David F. Anderson, Attorneys at Law. Today's guest is Mark Yarnold, CEO with Classic Home Care.
Hello. Today I'm very pleased to have Mark Yarnold, who's with Classic Home Care LLC, and he has a diverse and very interesting background. Could you please tell us a little bit about yourself and your company?
Absolutely. My background is that I was trained in social work. I have a master's degree in social work from Florida State University. That was many, many years ago, 1972. And since then, I've specialized in the management of aging, most often with older adults, and issues of aging with their children. And I've done that in a psychotherapeutic capacity for many years. Then I became a geriatric care manager, which is basically working with individuals surrounding aging issues, such as transferring to appropriate facilities, diagnosing ailments such as dementia and other forms of aging conditions, assisting families with the management of those issues, helping with transferring to appropriate facilities and securing appropriate services. That's what I've done all my life. And prior to coming to Florida, I was in New Jersey, and for 16 years I was a social work director in a large New Jersey hospital. So my background ever since I was in my early 20s has been with working with older adults.
Well, that's very impressive. I really like that expression managing aging. I think that's a big area that we don't hear much about. Yet the demographics are that the wide portion of the population is aging. So while we're aging, quote unquote, we're worshiping youth. Do you detect this disconnect out there in terms of dealing with aging?
Well, there's a tremendous disconnect, especially with children who have no idea what aging is about until they actually see it in their parents or loved ones. If someone forgets something on a routine basis, I find that oftentimes the children attempt to correct repeatedly. No, Mom, it's Tuesday. No, it's Tuesday. No, I'm your daughter. And that's the first thing I usually notice. And the kids become disturbed. They become upset. They become depressed because their parents are no longer the parents they knew as a child and growing up. So I have to help these children adjust to the problems of aging. Those memory issues oftentimes get worse. And when they get worse, if the children don't have a good understanding of what's happening, they will become depressed and they will get worse. And managing their illness becomes problematic for both their parent and for themselves.
You know, as an elder lawyer, I deal with this kind of the baby boomers. They're called the sandwich generation. The aging parents, they have their own children, they have jobs, they have their own issues, and as it compresses in on them, they almost become disoriented. They're reaching out. How do we solve this? They always relied upon mom and dad for strength, and they almost deny it. It's a form of denial. No, they just are forgetful at times. But on that spectrum, when does it come over? They really need an intervention.
Absolutely.
And that's where you come in?
Absolutely.
So how long has your company been in business?
We've been in business for 12 years.
Wonderful.
And we started out in Dade County, and we're now licensed in both Dade and Broward County, providing nurse registry services, which is different from a licensed home health care agency, primarily because we don't employ. We work with individuals who are independent contractors, not employees. The services we provide oftentimes are the same, assisting people with their activities of daily living, which means dressing, bathing, preparing food, shopping. But we are licensed as a nursing registry.
Is this mostly private pay, or is there an insurance component or a Medicare component? What parts of that play into this?
And that's one of the first questions that are asked of me. Two primary sources of payment: long-term care insurance and private out-of-pocket payment. Medicare does not pay for the service. That's a question that's often asked. But usually when mom or dad need the service, we'll work with a person to finance it, whether they pay privately or they need help with insurance. Long-term care insurance can be a difficult thing to work with. And oftentimes, long-term care insurance claims take months and months. We certainly can short-circuit that by providing claim information to the insurance company. And we work with the family through the process.
I know this won't be a shocking question, but are you saying that in general people have long-term care insurance, but it's difficult to get those benefits?
That's to put it mildly. I think you've learned that.
Yeah.
You know, even filing a claim these days can be a chore. Most oftentimes, insurance companies will not pay for a claim unless the individual, the caregiver, is provided through a licensed either agency, a home care agency, or a nurse registry. And we're the only ones who can provide really what the insurance company needs: timesheets, things that family members just have no idea about. So without the actual agency intervention or registry intervention, it's a difficult process. Could be very annoying. That alone could be depressing.
I know that down here in South Florida, we've been at the epicenter of a lot of fraud, Medicare fraud, et cetera. Does the fraud factor enter into what you all do? Or are they afraid of fraud? Are they vigilant about fraud?
People are always concerned about fraud and scams, of course. And I get asked many, many questions before my service is contracted with, and I encourage questions. People need to know about the services that are being provided or that they're investigating.
How would you describe, if there is such a thing, your typical client?
Well, actually, there is no such thing as a typical client.
Very interesting.
But if you want to talk about age, maybe a typical client is between 80 and 90. They're living alone, or they're living with a spouse who's also aging or aged. Individuals who need our help. The help is usually for, as I said before, activities of daily living, such as dressing, bathing. Most often, the referrals come through a child who said, mom or dad seems to be having trouble walking. We don't understand why. Or dad didn't remember this, or mom didn't remember that. We don't exactly know what the problem is. And we were wondering if you could help guide us through this. We don't know if mom or dad can benefit from your services. Fortunately, as a licensed clinical social worker, and after doing this for 40, 45 years, I'm able to go and assess the situation, help the children understand what their parent is going through, discuss options, even provide a diagnosis if it's obvious, such as post-traumatic stress disorder. Many people who have been in the Holocaust during the war oftentimes display symptoms of a trauma. And these are the kinds of things that I encounter all the time.
That's very interesting. One thing that I was thinking about what you just said, it's been my experience, and let me know what you think. The medical profession, while you would think that they would be the front line, I'm finding that because they're hard pressed, that they don't have time, that they don't catch this or they don't deal with it. Have you found the same thing to be true?
Yes, all the time.
And I'm dealing with clients, and they'll say, but the doctor says that he or she is okay, but did you tell them? Well, they don't have time. They told me to talk to their secretary, and then nothing happens. And then a little bit worse, and a little bit worse, and until something triggers that, or if the family, the children intercede. The other thing that I thought was very interesting in what you just said, you said your typical clients in their 80s and 90s. Well, a generation ago, that would have almost been unheard of. So I think the important thing is, it used to be we retired at 65 and we died at 67. Whereas now to live to be 80, 90, or 100 is not that extraordinary. And yet, has there been any change in the retirement planning for those 30, 40 years that you're living without working? And I think that is always amazing to me. We don't discuss this.
It's like buying a cemetery plot. You just don't discuss it.
You don't discuss it.
Or doing estate planning, or Medicaid planning, or something like. You just don't discuss it.
I had a lady one time, and I was after her, and she was about 70 something.
Mm-hmm.
But I said, now listen, we've talked enough. We need to get you to sign the will.
Right.
No. Why won't you sign? And she said, well, if you want to know the truth, if I sign the will, I just know I'm going to die. And I thought that was a good lesson, that there are lots of interesting psychological components in aging, dealing with aging.
Absolutely.
And you have to be multifaceted, I think, to deal with them. Or I dealt with this. You probably have encountered this. Well, my children are just pushing this because they want my money. Or, I mean, the list goes on. It's like, well, no, maybe your children are just concerned about you. Maybe they're worried, Did you deal with those types of issues?
And sometimes they're right.
Sometimes they're right. Absolutely.
Sometimes their children might actually look forward to their prospective inheritance.
I think you're absolutely, and I think that even not children, caregivers, there's elder exploitation, there's elder abuse, and this is a whole other explosion. Do you encounter that?
Absolutely. I also work with people such as yourself, elder law attorneys, and that will help cut down the incidence of being scammed or being taken advantage of in some ways. But people are reluctant to talk about the things you just mentioned. And to do that entails a great bit of strength. Someone has to initiate the discussion. You have to be a psychologist or a social worker, Mike, really to help these people through the system.
When I got my LLM in elder law, I'd say probably 25% of our coursework was involving psychological, medical, all of those types to learn the dynamics that go on in families and go on with aging. We as human beings don't like to face our mortality. It's the rare person who says, no, I know I'm going to die. I'm prepared for it. I want to get everything taken care of. Usually they'll talk about everything but that. I think one guy said to me, he says, quite honestly, I cannot imagine the world continuing without me. And I said, well, that's a pretty honest statement.
Yeah.
Let's build on that, Or I think that some people think that just accumulating wealth alone, I mean, I've dealt with clients that they're multi-millionaires.
Yes.
They have no family.
Right.
So now, how do you care for somebody that has no loved one? I mean, it's really, some of the stuff is pretty sad that we deal with. But I think that it's not sad in the sense that we are out here, a lot of us, trying and working to solve these problems.
When I do work with an elder care attorney, and I used to have an office with one, everything you described is so accurate, and that's when this person used to say, stop the conversation, bring Mark in. And I'm the one who would introduce the difficult topics. She had me to do that. And I was glad to be available to do that. I was able to do that easier than she was. So there is a definite role for the emotional aspect of this whole thing, whether it's talking about doing estate planning or helping a parent transition to a more to a setting that provides more care.
Right. Well, elder law certainly is interdisciplinary.
Yes.
I cannot do it all. So I have to have a good network of people to solve any variety of the problems out there. Every case is different. There are no two elder law cases exactly the same. So how are you different from your competitors?
I think my company is not company. I call it a registry. Company. The word company is often associated with a home health care company. Being a licensed clinical social worker, I often go beyond just the provision of services, and I don't do it as part of running a registry. I do this on my own. When I see an individual, such as a fellow who disappeared last week, a 93-year-old gentleman, Holocaust survivor, provided him services for many, many years, 4 hours a day. He just needed a little help. I get a frantic call from the family member. Dad's disappeared. Well, we found Dad after 12 hours, and the family was very upset. I met with the family. I met with the client or the gentleman. We discussed what was happening, and I spoke to him privately, and it seems he was grieving. All of a sudden, in a supermarket, he saw an image of his father. That triggered what I thought was post-traumatic stress disorder from the war, because now all he talks about is the horrors of being in a concentration camp. And the family needs support, and this is above and beyond the provision of services. And my caregiver, who I placed there, doesn't really talk to him. She doesn't understand, and she's very puzzled and disturbed about what he's going through. So much of my time these days is spent speaking with the family, speaking with my client, let's call him Ted, and I try to see him once every few weeks just to see if there are any changes, because one day I know he's either going to need additional home care services or services at home, or he's going to need a more of an institutional setting, such as an assisted living facility. That's just one example of services that I consider are very personalized services, but every client of my registry receives this level of service. And I don't know how many owners or directors of my type of registry can provide these services. This is what sets us apart.
Well, that's very impressive to me. You know, your credentials, your understanding of this. First of all, I couldn't imagine being in a concentration camp. That's always mystified me, that whole experience. But I've dealt with some veterans,
Yes.
post-traumatic stress syndrome, and you know, you learn there are certain things you don't say to them. Well, how was it?
Yeah.
Or, well, you can get over it. It's over now. Well, for them, and I think that this reoccurs. You know, as I've dealt with some of them, I'm just mystified at the horrors they've seen. I had a client, I never would have known this, as we were talking over a period of time, and he says something about D-Day. What about D-Day? Well, he was in D-Day, and I said to him, I wish I hadn't said this, I just didn't know what. I said to him, were you in the first assault wave? And he goes, well, no, they all got killed. So you can only imagine what he saw. And then we were talking later on, a few more months down the road, he was in the Battle of the Bulge.
Oh my goodness.
So this went on. Nobody would have known it. And here he is dealing with this years and years and years later. And I started to get a better picture of him as a whole person. Then I had some very, very subtle conversations with his children. And they said, Dad's never talked about that. They didn't even know it. So I said, now you understand, some of these issues are maybe reoccurring with him. And I think it's important to go down and have that sensitivity. But it's taking me time to develop that in myself. I'm learning this every day. Some of these people bring in life experiences that are beyond belief. Well, that thing with the Holocaust, that's a whole other issue.
It is. It's a very traumatic issue, and oftentimes the person who they begin to talk to, such as yourself, because you're dealing with real life matters, they open up. There's a reluctance to open up to children. But
in his generation, that was a sign of weakness.
Yes,
he says,
absolutely.
We were just told to tough it out, that we would just get over it. Well, I'm not sure anybody ever did the things that he saw, opposing the Nazis in France. I mean, it's hard to imagine. It's hard to imagine. Where do you see all of this managing aging? Where do you see this moving into the future? What's your prediction?
It's going to increase with people living extended lives and longer. They're going to be subject to more trauma based upon the events of their life. But we're also going to see more physical illness. Unfortunately, people's bodies decline oftentimes before their minds. So we're also seeing more dementia. And if you want to correlate this with long-term care insurance, less and less companies are writing long-term care insurance policies because they didn't predict, they didn't realize, they didn't have the insight that people were living longer lives. So I would say a fraction of the insurance companies that provide long-term care insurance, well, there's only a fraction of them, as a matter of fact, and they're getting more difficult to deal with. But I think we're going to see this as an increasing problem, and I'm not so sure we should look at it as a problem. I think there are challenges. There are challenges for companies such as home care and registry, and any organization that deals with problems of aging are going to become much busier in the future.
When I go to these elder law seminars, the elder law bar is grappling with these issues. They just came out with this ABLE account. It's sort of loosely related to a college fund. But it doesn't, the first $14,000 won't impact your eligibility for Medicaid. There's a legislative approach, the expansion of Medicaid. You're going to see this cobbling together solutions. But still, I deal with this. People tell me, but isn't the government going to take care of me? And you have to figure out new ways to tell them. Well, they may tell you that, but will they have the ability to? See, that's the problem. So the longer that you live, and you're dealing with Parkinson's and MS and on, in addition to the dementias, and people just say, well, that won't happen to me. But the statistics are that it will.
It will.
And that's why they're not writing long-term care insurance like they used to, although they've reaped a bonanza in life insurance.
Yes, they have.
That's, so it's interesting dealing with these companies.
I'm sure.
Well, you're just a wealth of information. And again, that's why I'm very happy to be an elder law attorney, because it's nice to meet good people, and it's to craft solutions to solve problems for people. So I think you probably agree with me. I love the greatest generation. I love my elder clients. I find them to be funny and full of wisdom and delightful. And I think that we as a society owe them, some care and concern. We don't want to discard them.
And let me say about you, from the short time I've known you, that I hope your clients appreciate you because you seem to have that additional degree of sensitivity that's very necessary.
Well, I find a lot of satisfaction. I like the people that I work with. I love the nurses. I love the geriatric care managers. I love all of these people. Sometimes it's like a thankless job. Society doesn't appreciate them enough. And I'm always amazed at the jobs that they do.
Well, you're absolutely right. Society doesn't appreciate it. And largely it's because of ignorance of knowing about the aging process. People often in an institutional setting look at a person as an old person without looking at their life. Oftentimes the nurses tell me, well, he doesn't know anything. He's demented. And I'll say, but take a look at Mr. Jones as he might have been 40 years ago. And that provides these caring employees with a whole new perspective. And I remember when I worked more in hospitals and in assisted living facilities, the first thing I used to do is ask the families for a picture of their mother or father years ago, and I put it up above their bed. And it seemed to provide the staff and anyone who went in to speak with them with an entirely new perspective. Like, they were just as young as I was one of these years ago. And maybe I should respect him a little bit more than just treat him as a confused person. So that's one of the things I do, and among many things, to help engender the respect people have.
When I think of these people, they effectively, one way or another, went through two world wars, a major depression. They fought in Korea, they fought in Vietnam, helped put a man on the moon. It goes on and on. They deserve our thanks and our care. They're amazing. They built this country. I kind of wonder if we have the same stuff today that they had. I think, it's questionable. So, well, I tell you, it's a pleasure to have you here, and I look forward to working with you in the future. And the elder community is very lucky to have you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.